thanks to Comicid for inviting us in their premises, and thanks for Pax Christi to co-organize this event with us. So, as we have seen, the panorama is quite shocking because of the ever-increasing human rights violations, and these are mostly done by transnational corporations worldwide. So I'd like to address briefly what we can do to better regulate transnational corporations. This is a brief summary of the points I will make, and I won't be too long on the first point, and also time is running, so just to remind a bit different initiatives that the EU have taken, and also some different initiatives that have been taking place at member state level. So in 2012, the Transparency and Accountability Initiative wants to force transnational corporations and states to publish the revenues that come from extractive industries. This will enable civil society in resource-rich countries to hold accountable their government for how the money is used. I'm sorry. Then I also think about the non-financial reporting that would oblige transnational corporations to disclose certain information on their social and environmental behavior. But we regret that there's no, for instance, agreement on a common indicator that thus makes it very complicated to make a comparison between different companies' behavior. Regarding the conflict mineral regulation, I know we are more focusing here on Africa, and when one talks about conflict mineral, it's usually the Central African region that comes to your mind, but this piece of regulation is very interesting because it really recognizes the strength of the due diligence exercise. So what is due diligence? It's the exercise that transnational corporations undertake to proactively check their supply chain, to try to look out where eventual risk could be, and to, of course, alleviate those, and then to monitor and audit this process. So I've been working on this piece of regulation for the last 3 years. So we had a strong hope when the European Parliament really enhanced this regulation, obliging companies, all companies throughout the entire supply chain to disclose this information on their due diligence exercise. But then very frustrated in the end when the Council came to its conclusion, because it's only the importers of raw material that will have to disclose information, while the importers of finished or semi-finished or manufactured products such as this laptop, our cell phones, etc., won't have to disclose. So we miss the huge parts of the volumes that enter the European Union market. So yeah, three years of work for quite some frustration in the end, because the volumes that we will be checking are very small. But this just to stress the importance of and the recognition from the European Union of the due diligence exercise that has been standardized by the OECD guidelines on this that I invite you to check. Then in member states, also many initiatives have been taken. In France, notably, there was the law on devoir de vigilance, the duty of care, quite similar to the due diligence. I mean, it's very inspired by this due diligence philosophy. It was adopted in March of this year. Well, following a strong lobby also from French transnational, it will only apply to companies that have more than 5,000 employees. So yeah, quite a high threshold, but we are very curious to see the first results of this. Other initiative in the Netherlands, it was voted in the Dutch Parliament in February this year, a law targeting child labor in supply chains. And when was it? It's written there. Yeah, in 2015, the UK passed the Modern Slavery Act, so also to make sure that UK transnational companies do this due diligence exercise to check their supply chain, to look out if there are any slave-like conditions, working conditions in their supply chain. So what this little panorama that I've done shows us is that there are various initiatives, and we welcome this, of course, but they are taking place at very different geographical level, and they are targeting different industry sectors, shall it be for all the related to the 3 TGs, for instance, it's those minerals targeted by the conflict mineral regulation, or otherwise it's also just targeting specific impacts. So there is an urgent need, I think, to harmonize these different initiatives at EU, but also at international level. So I come now to the UN legally binding treaty, but I can't run into this without having a short word on the United Nations guiding principles that were unanimously adopted in 2011 and that put in place the protect, respect and remedy framework, so that the state has the duty to protect, the transnational corporations have the responsibility to respect human rights and also to ensure remedy for victims of eventual human rights abuses. And since 2011 and the translation of the UN guiding principles into national action plans, we see very little advances or enhancements in the case of access to remedy for victims. So thus this very interesting piece of legislation that was adopted in the UN Human Rights Council in June 2014 that established an open-ended intergovernmental working group that has the task to think, discuss, debate and propose elements for this UN binding treaty. So since 2014 there have been 2 working sessions only dedicated to propose what the elements could be. Now this last week was the first one that was dedicated to really start negotiating on these elements. So very lively debates, very interesting week, and I'll come to the main elements. 3 main elements that we have been with many other civil society organizations, but also with trade unions, with parliamentarians, with church organizations. We have been advocating for these 3. That are to require legally that transnational corporations carry out a due diligence exercise. Also to guarantee in free trade agreements the primacy of human rights clauses and also environmental clauses, indeed, because it's very linked. When indigenous communities, they defend their territory, they put their rights at risk, but protecting the territory and the environment. And last one, the important 3rd pillar, as it's called in the UN guiding principles, is the one regarding the access to remedy. So this element to ensure equal access to justice to all victims of human rights abuses. I'm sure many of you have heard of the Chevron Texaco case in Ecuador or the Shell case in Nigeria, with many cases traveling from one country to another. So here the possibility that sounds quite groundbreaking, but on the other hand, initiatives such as this take place in the business sector, so it would be to put in place an international court or a tribunal to hear cases. And I put this in comparison with the ISDS, so the investment state dispute mechanisms that many of you, I'm sure, have heard of during the TTIP and the CETA negotiations. This has now gone to another level with a new project on the multilateral investment court that the European Union is defending. So we would like to see the same for human rights. So now, what happened last week? We were very happy, first of all, to see that, well, this is my last slide. So, yeah, it's still fresh in my mind, but I couldn't have time to put it all down. So first of all, yeah, we're very happy to see the EU delegation in the room, along with many other member states. And I'm saying this because it was not at all guaranteed from the beginning that the EU delegation would be there. They also, yeah, had substantive questions on the different elements that were prepared. So this showed a level of preparation. They read the elements, and yeah, then again the Monday morning we were fearing to go back in 2015, actually, when the European Union was again putting forward some conditions to enter the negotiations. These conditions were, most importantly, to refer back to the UN guiding principles. And yeah, as you've seen, we see the limits of the UN guiding principles, and we are here. I mean, we were there in this room to negotiate a binding treaty. So for civil society and human rights defenders, there was no question to go back to a debate on the UN guiding principles. We're here to debate legally binding treaty. But though we still insist a lot on the complementarity between both processes. Since the vote in 2014 to establish this open-ended intergovernmental working group, we have seen with positive reaction that many countries have started working hard on implementing the UN guiding principles. So, such as Colombia, for instance, the first country in Latin America who started working on this. So then we question ourselves a bit. Is it I had a talk actually with the Colombian delegate who is showing their NAP, their national action plans, and thus preventing any further discourse about the eventual gaps that these have to say, hey, we have a guiding principle implemented in our country, everything is fine. But yeah, still, Colombia is one of the most dangerous countries for human rights defenders. On the second day of the negotiations, we were happy also to hear that the EU officially acknowledged the existing gaps in terms of access to justice. So this is, I mean, seeing the problem is the first step to start solving it, I think. What were some, yeah, encouraging signs also throughout the week? It's also important to note that the Sunday before the start of the negotiation, there was a worldwide parliamentarian forum united in Geneva to present a declaration that was signed by many parliamentarians from the world, asking for a good and substantive week of negotiations. There were also in France 245 members of the parliament calling on President Macron to support this process, and as you remember, France was among the member states who was the first one to put into law their law on duty of care. So this makes sense. Also encouraging is that there were more than 100 states present in the Human Rights Council room, in comparison to only 80 that we counted last year. So growing momentum, I think, and a growing interest from states being in the Human Rights Council. And yeah, we were from a society, more than 1,000 civil society organizations. I don't know if you imagine that this is really a huge coalition for CSOs, but also for, yeah, as I said, trade union, church organization, etc., who signed on to a very progressive statement calling for these negotiations on the UN binding treaty to go ahead. Also during the week, we are very happy to hear the delegate from the Holy See who did a remarkable intervention, drawing clear attention to the asymmetry in the international law, and thus calling for stronger regulation and enforcement mechanisms. So yeah, we will continue to spread this very nice words from the Holy See. As I said, it's a bit of a hypocrite situation from the European Union, who's at the same time pushing for this multilateral investment court, and also funding a lot the UN guiding principles that I acknowledged already. It's a good step in the right direction, but this binding treaty process is led by Ecuador, and there has been even during last week some discussions on the lack of budget. So there would be it's a clear incentive to call states to believe in this process and start also to really fund it more. So my main message that I would like to remember would be from the start of all the different initiatives that take place. I think this binding treaty could give a level playing field for human rights all over the world to be respected, and really tackle the issue of access to remedy that is so much lacking for many human rights defenders and those from Chiapas or other parts of the world. So yeah, despite the several attempts to block the process, also from countries, as it's not very surprising, from USA, from Russia, and does the EU want to be seen as those countries? It's a question I ask. The mandate of the open-ended intergovernmental working group will continue. And we will, yeah, keep the momentum high, and hope to negotiate on a draft text. This year it's only a presented element, so next year we hope to have a text to start negotiations. So yeah, I wanted to end with the fact to really stress the fact that this is a unique chance for the EU, for our member states, for all stakeholders to show leadership on this issue in the coming months. Thank you.